Hi, and welcome to another episode of Unstructured Unlocked. My name is Chris Wells, VP of R&D at Indico Data, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Michelle Gouveia. Michelle?
Hey, Chris. We are pleased today to have Stacey Brown, founder and president of InsurTech Hartford, here as our special guest today. Stacey, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely.
Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So Stacey, you and I have known each other for a while from the conference circuit and InsurTech Hartford specifically. But for all of our listeners, do you mind just giving a little bit of your background and your experience for us?
Sure. Definitely, I think a lot of people have gotten to know me over the years through the work with InsurTech Hartford. But for those that might be new, Stacey Brown, I've been on the carrier side of the insurance technology industry for 20 plus years. I've worked for companies such as Travelers and AXA XL, and I've had the opportunity to do basically everything there is to do in the technology space over the years, from building policy admin systems by hand when we used to do that back in the day before the big package solutions came along, to even AI and ML related projects. I recently left my role at Excel as head of innovation delivery, where I was overseeing a lot of different initiatives at the company. So I also have a pretty broad background as far as innovation goes.
Yeah, innovation in the insurance space is something we talk about.
In the insurance space, yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Awesome. Well, Stacey, I would love to. With those two hats, kind of the technology background, but also the lens and the focus on innovation. From my own experience within the insurance carrier, and just what I see in my role today, there's synergies there, but there's also sometimes some butting heads between the innovation projects that teams want to get off the ground and either the technology budget or the capabilities that exist in-house from a carrier perspective. How did you marry those two, and what were some of the challenges or some of the successes you might have had within the carrier pushing those two agendas forward?
Well, it's always a struggle. I heard somebody say once, and so this wasn't me, but I've repeated it many times because it's so true, that when it comes to insurance companies and technology, they basically have the ability to do anything they want. They just don't have the ability to do everything they want, right? There's a lot of great problems, to solve. A lot of every single one of them is wonderful in its own right, but every organization struggles mainly with two big things, right? Budget and capacity. There's only so many people in an organization that have the skills necessary to run these projects, and those skills are usually in demand across multiple projects. And so even when something makes a lot of sense financially, right? If you can get past the budget hurdle, you sometimes wind up running into now how do we execute this hurdle? And there's always somebody out there, a provider, consultant firm or whatever, willing to come in and step in and wear whatever hat that you want to wear on your team. But it's not the same as having your experts engaged, right? So budget itself is usually a first hurdle, and every company is in a little bit of a different spot, but most insurance companies are they manage their budget tightly. They're trying to meet certain combined ratio targets, and so IT spend is typically an allocation for the year, right? So they sit down and they think, oh, we're gonna spend, whether it's 10 million or 150 million or whatever the budget for the company is going to be on technology next year. So when you've got a fixed capacity and a fixed budget, it leaves you really with prioritization. And Michelle, you asked the question about how do you overcome the challenges of that. quite honestly, after 20 something years of doing it, you just don't sometimes because, on top of if you can make a solid business case and then if you could even make the case that you have the expertise and capacity to do it, sometimes there's other things that are beyond your control, like I don't want to say politics, but if there's a group in the organization that's making a lot of money for the company, their voice is going to weigh more than somebody else's voice, right? So you wind up having to balance those internal things as well. They definitely come into the factor when it comes down to prioritization. So I don't know. I hope I kind of went on a long rant about that, but hopefully that was insightful.
It's helpful background color. You raised the notion of combined ratios, and one of the places where we know folks are focusing right now is trying to fix up those ratios by focusing on, obviously underwriting and claims. And then we've heard a lot lately about the intake process being a focus, especially for technology spend. So what are people doing in those areas today, and what would they like to be doing if they had the budget, they had everything they needed?
The intake process, I guess there's really two main points of intake for as I'm thinking of it, and as I think is what you mean. One would be during the underwriting process, the intake of a new submission, something for an underwriter to look at and try to make it come up with some kind of price quote that hopefully leads to a bind, right?
Yep.
The other side of the coin is on the claim side, right? First notice of loss. And, there's been a lot of, over the years, a lot of different innovations in that space of people trying to come up with apps and web portals and things like that to help make claims reporting easier. But still, the fact of the matter is that every day, the first notice of loss insurance carriers receive is a letter from a law firm in the mail, right? Like it happens every day. So no matter how much structured approach and user-friendly user journey type of tech and approaches we take, there's still unstructured initiation of the claims process. I don't know that that'll ever go away either, right? Like if somebody hires a law firm because they don't want to talk to their insurance company first, well, the law firm's not going to log on to your company portal to submit an FNOL request, right? They're gonna write that 12-page document and stick it in the mail, send it certified return receipt and all that stuff, right?
That's billable hours right there.
It is, yeah.
We've talked a lot about that, Stacey. Actually, that intake can look different depending on your line of business, the company that you're working for, right, from various channels. And so, to your point, I agree. There's never going to be a single way that all documentation comes into the carrier, either on the underwriting side or on the claim side. That what we've talked about a lot is having the right mechanisms in place to receive it, regardless of the channel that it comes in. So from an automation standpoint, what have you seen in your roles in terms of, you mentioned it, right, the unstructured data intake, but even getting your systems prepared to then digest that data in a way that's usable in the downstream systems?
Yeah, I mean, it usually starts... the most common way that these workflows starts, it tends to be through email inboxes, right? So you might get like a call center or a mail center that takes mail and scans it in and then sends it to a mailbox, and then you might get brokers and agents submitting claims that they're hearing into an inbox, or even on the policy submission side, right? Email is just like tends to be the number one place that it's probably the most common place that the process starts from. There could be other fancier things like API based integrations and queues and things of that sort, but really it seems to be inbox. And then, there's still a good amount of people managing those inboxes, right? So over the last, 15 years, as outsourcing and offshoring of this type of work became popular, the way to save money was just to move the workload to the lowest cost labor market. And, that still happens. But what's happened as a result of that is it's actually made the business case for automation even more challenging, right? Because if you're paying somebody, $8 an hour, and they're able to process, 30 emails an hour, right? Like that's a lot of productivity for a pretty low cost. And unless you're getting like 1 million of these things in a day, it's really hard to get the scale to make an investment, right? So that's like one challenge point right there, right? But so when it comes to automating the process, somehow or other, you have to be able to break down that document, identify what type of document it is. Is it a claims document, or is it a submission, or is it a bill that should be going to the procurement team or whatever, right? There's all kinds of things that those letters can be. But then let's say you find that, this looks like a potential claim from a lawyer. You need to go through there. You need to extract the entities, right? You need to know, try to figure out who is the claimant, who is the policy holder, what's the law firm, if there is one even. So it gets pretty complex to automate that process. And over the last several years, I've seen a number of initiatives with different technologies trying to figure out, how do we classify the documents? How do we identify the data sets? Taking first, OCRing the data, putting it into sentences, then using sentence fragmenting technologies to identify the subjects, and ultimately, trying to extract the data. It's just been a real slog. So what's been happening is there's been this trend to go towards specialization when it comes to the AI, the natural language processing technologies required to do that kind of extraction. So, there are companies out there, that when it comes to the technology and the frameworks around AI, whether they're ML based or rules based, there's only so many patterns, right? And so everyone at some level of abstraction is doing the same thing. But where people are choosing to focus and go real deep into just claim first notice of loss for homeowners policies, right? Like that is increasing success because you start getting enough volume in order to do the training, and actually that's like a whole nother challenge, right? So another challenge is just making sure that you have the volumes of data to train these models. And so where there are providers out there that are able to use their learnings across multiple carriers, that is a way of training models better and faster. And that's, from there, once the data is extracted, it needs to get from that unstructured format to the structured format. And that usually means that whatever the downstream systems are, it's usually you're starting out with your policy admin system. And so most policy admin systems today, IT groups, insurance companies have invested in their IT to put APIs out in front of them. Everything that's out of the box today comes with out of the box APIs. So The good thing is I think we've gotten to the point as an industry where, I don't have an exact figure, but I'd say it's a very high percentage of the solutions out there are API enabled, right? So if you can get good at extracting this data, now you need to somehow map that data to the structured message format of these APIs, right? And then once you can so that in and of itself could require some magic in terms of AI and things of that sort. So
I'm going to jump in there because my list of follow-up questions is now almost more than I can keep in my head. There's a lot of good questions.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Go for it, though.
The first one is, given you mentioned that volumes have to be really high to make a case to cut off the outsourcing and bring it back in-house with automation. So does the return on investment argument shift to looking like repeatability in the process and therefore cleaner structured data, or is there some other tact that you see folks taking to make that automation case nowadays?
Definitely quality is the thing, because one of the downsides of using the low cost labor approach is quality. Because people type and they make mistakes when they're typing, and you know what, computers make mistakes when they're OCRing and reading. So you can never get to zero in terms of error rate. Mistakes are going to happen, but I believe that computers do a better job than humans at this stuff, especially when the humans get under pressure to go faster. You're in a renewal season, half your team just got COVID, whatever it is, right? When pressure happens, error rates go up too. Computers are always consistent. They'll always make the same errors and they'll always do the same things right.
Yeah, failing the same way every time is I don't know, it's comforting. You can build a process around it.
Yeah. And another argument around it, though, is trying to shift away from the cost side of it. And also considering some of the other costs, right? Like, it's easy to look and say, well, you're paying somebody $8 an hour. That's so cheap. But then stop and think about, where's that $8 an hour worker actually working? They're working in an office space that's in a footprint and probably in a major city. And, what if you didn't have all that overhead, right? Or you can greatly reduce that overhead. But then there's also looking at it differently to say, like, well, you've had all these people, working in your processing center for the last, let's say 8 years or something like that. Chances are they've learned a thing or two about your business along the way. Yep. What if you can use them in higher valued ways? So now the shift in the conversation goes from cost to from cash, cost to opportunity cost. It's like, what upside could we gain by having these people do higher valued work, and so that opportunity cost side is something to look at. It's a harder sell, and you usually have to be in a position where you just need the talent to grow your business, right?
Stacey, you hit on a number of points that we've actually talked about over a few podcasts, specifically that opportunity cost and helping automation, helping get people to do the work that I don't want to say it's more meaningful, but that is more analytical, right? Like you're taking out the data entry and the repeated steps to be more, what is the business outcome, or how can they drive to specific results? I'm curious, in your experience, what pieces of those different processes do you see that opportunity cost being most beneficial? Is it faster response time on a claim because you've got all that data there, and so that person spends less time figuring out what the claim is and more time customer facing? Is it faster time from quote to bind because that data is getting in there and it's cleaner on the underwriting side? Like where have you seen, I guess, where have you focused more of your time, or where have you seen carriers that you've spoken to really focusing in within the different stages of these processes?
I mean, there's definitely, from, wearing an operations hat, quantifiable metrics that every, service center, call center, back office team manages to, and, volumetric ones like how many per day, how many per hour. There could be quality ones around error rates, the number of times things go back through the process. So those measures are all there. I think one thing that doesn't really get, the analytical work is definitely something that, freeing up those resources to do more of that is definitely a piece of it. But there's actually something very important that I don't know if you guys have been running into this and seeing a lot of people talk about it, but the technology is actually enabling us to be more human again, right? Less time spent having to enter data and even having to analyze that data by crunching it into reports and putting it into the spreadsheet and then to that spreadsheet. Some people look at that as analytical stuff, but what about being able to spend more time with your customers, show better empathy? What about actually having humans answer the damn phone, right? Like, geez, who does that anymore, right? Yeah. I think there's a huge opportunity for all this technology to enable us to just be going back to human again and spending more time together, building relationships, collaborating, showing empathy, and building trust with our customers, with our partners, and others.
Yeah, that's a sub theme of this podcast, which is how human-centric the whole automation world is, and the opportunities that it unlocks for people. Speaking of people, I want to go back to another point you made, which is around, for some of these AI systems, especially the amount of data you need to train them to get to a high quality. And you mentioned the notion that there are vendors out there that are combining training data from multiple carriers. Why are carriers okay with that? I don't get it.
Why would they not be okay? Well, I can answer that one myself, right? Because there's a greater outcome for the whole in doing so, right? And it's not like there's a line around the block of carriers saying, I want to sign up for that idea, right? But sometimes, companies have been smart around how they've put their licensing agreements together and who owns what in terms of IP. And so the models are something that they will claim IP rights to, they being the providers, right? And once those models get trained, they own those models. And now the next company that they go to, they're coming to the table with those models, and they're now improving them with new data sets, and that's how the evolution of the models and particularly those specialized models, right? That's how they improve. And one carrier can't really do that themselves, because the only data they will ever see is the data in the four walls of their organization.
Yep. No, that makes sense. It's interesting. So, at some point, if a tech vendor gets enough of this data, then that's a danger to the carriers themselves, it seems like. But
well, sometimes, usually the few things. Number one, if carriers are sharing data to the vendors, they're usually they're always anonymizing it. No vendor should ever want to take data from a carrier that's not anonymized, right, in one way or another. Whether it's just outright encrypting key fields, which makes it hard to learn, or just using, scrambler routines who, will it'll just randomly replace Chris with Stacey and whoever else is in the database and kind of switch them around. So you actually have real names in the fields. They're just not. When you put them all together, they're real people, right? So like there's all kinds of routines around that for anonymizing. So, but the thing is that usually the carriers aren't like giving the data to the provider. The provider's bringing the solution to the data, and then the models get trained, and then and then they own it.
Okay, good. Thank you for unpacking that for me. It's helpful.
Sure.
Pull on this thread of data just a little bit, because something else that Chris and I have talked about is, one, the data that the carrier or the broker or the reinsurer has in-house, as you mentioned, Stacey, right? And then there's a lot of companies out there now selling data, as a service, right? And we've seen a lot of companies doing this to enhance or supplement the submission process, or validation that what's on the submission or even what's on the claim is correct. Have you seen a lot of solutions or a lot of focus on additional data to support or supplement existing carrier data? And what are some examples there? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That examples. Let me see if anything comes to mind. Sometimes my brain freezes on these specific examples, but definitely I've seen lots of solutions, and I know all the carriers are working on it. Like, for example, InsurTech Hartford has an annual innovation challenge where we work with carriers to identify themes and challenges that they have, and then we'll do an open call for solutions. And last year, the 2022 Innovation Challenge, the Hartford sponsored a category around data for improving the underwriting process, right? So that's just one example that comes to mind of carriers being hungry for this. And there is a ton of data out there. And like at my last company, we had a person whose job it was just to constantly be looking at the marketplace for all the data providers to figure out who's bringing in something that's new and different. And every line of business kind of has its own needs. And so, there's a few data providers out there that are like the giants of the world, like, let's say the Verus and the Carpe Datas and the LexisNexuses and folks like that. And they're all going to love me for saying that. And anyone I forget is now hating me, but but there's definitely the big conglomerates, but there's very niche providers out there as well. And I worked for a global carrier, and one of the challenges there was the data set consistently across the globe wasn't there, right? You'd be able to get much better granular data about property in the United States than, let's say, property in Uganda, right? So so your processes have to be tuned to that as well, right? So we like to think about, boy, if you just do everything the same way, it doesn't always work that way.
And I'll just add on to that. And Chris, this is one of your favorite things to just like digest, is sometimes the data you want is just not available due to the regulatory environment in that country, right? So the one example I know of is the amount of data available on small businesses between what's available in the UK and what's available in the US is strikingly different, just based on what these businesses have to do from a self-reporting perspective. So Stacey, to your point, I'm sure there's, even if you have a strategy, right, a data strategy, or to implement that globally must look different based on your area, your geography of focus.
Yeah, and absolutely, it does.
And then from a technology standpoint, it must pose other challenges from how do you get the system ready? How do you make sure that you have different systems that can take in whatever is available, or pass through on something if something's not available that exists in a different process?
Yeah, nowadays, architectures are very integration, focused. Every carrier has to be good at doing integrations now. To not be able to do integrations would be a problem, I'm sure. And there are a lot of different patterns for how to do that. We've seen a lot of event-based architecture type of solutions becoming more and more popular, which allows things to basically move at the speed of of computers, right? As opposed to, in the old days, everything would be batch scheduled. And, even when APIs came along, people would batch schedule their APIs, right? And so now, with cloud computing, and allowing people to scale up and scale down more easily, as well as these more modern event-based architectures like a Kafka, or I forget what Microsoft's version of that is, but these types of solutions are enabling us to do more integrations faster and still be performant. Because in the olden days, it's like every time you added another step into the thing, it was like another 3 seconds that someone was going to be waiting, and so there was always that challenge. So in addition to all the data, we are seeing the technology advances, both in compute power, storage, and architectures, and security. All these things are just amazing, the way that solutions are being built than, let's say, 20 years ago when I used to do it myself by hand, right? So
yeah, it's also changing the cost structure as well, but we don't have to go into that quagmire just yet. We've talked a lot about the challenges and what's hard to automate and why it's hard to automate, but then I was getting bummed out, honestly, but then you raised, the fact that integrations are making a lot of things simpler. So on the automation side, especially when it comes to, artificial intelligence, that kind of framework, what's working actually on these intake processes?
It seems that you can get to like 80% pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. 80% of what, actually?
I was just going to say, by 80%, okay. I would say in 2 dimensions. Number one, 80% of the data elements that you're looking for can get you 80% accuracy.
Yeah.
Pretty quickly. Then you wind up having these certain data elements that become difficult and harder to find. I've actually seen one of the things that's always been a challenge is extracting financials from financial reports.
Yeah.
Everybody has a different way of doing it. So the old days, the solution was, well, we'll just go to like Capital IQ or one of those, S&P or one of those data providers, because they had already conformed everybody's financial reports into some common data structure, right? But now what we're looking at are solutions that, you could take the annual report and suck it in, and we know how the assets, liabilities, and equities break down, and we can get all the ratios that that we want out of it once we have that. So that's advanced. That's stuff that I've seen people really struggle with, and I'm excited to see. Please don't ask me to remember the name of the company, but I recently seen somebody that can actually do that pretty well. And that is a part of the intake process, depending on the line of business you're writing. A lot of the things that are in commercial and liability related are going to require financial statements, right? And so being able to extract data from financial statements is a huge challenge. But anyway, 80% of 80% pretty quickly. But then in terms of accuracy, there's that point of diminishing returns that, remember, you'll never hit 100%. Even if you are 100% human, you will not be 100%. So there's, with anything quality-wise, you reach these points where it's a lot more investment for not as big of an improvement. And if anybody's getting above 95% accuracy, they're doing pretty damn well. And so that's another thing. One of the other challenges, though, when you start taking, truly unstructured stuff like out of the mail or even looking at certain contracts, people start like highlighting things and color coding things and drawing arrows on the form, like, I meant this. Well, when this happens, circle, arrow over here, insert over here, right? And it's like, how is a computer supposed to read that? Like, there will always be I think we're still generations of technology away, which, by the way, is faster than human generations, but we are still many generations away from computers being able to deal with some of those things. But when it comes to reading letters, reading structured forms, there's a lot of solutions out there for that stuff right now. So the question really that I would have for you, if I can flip it around, is what differentiates companies now, right? Because if everyone's using basically the same, frameworks and same patterns, what's really differentiating companies?
I'm gonna let Michelle answer that in the more general case, and then I can talk a little bit about Indico specifically.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it, Stacey, at one point of eventually something will break down if it's rules based or templates based. I think what we're seeing is, again, to that ability to specialize, is what are the solutions that are leveraging AI or machine learning to not just have something fall into a rules based engine, but something that is more adaptable and flexible to how things come in, which is probably a nice tee up to Chris. But I'll make one other point as well, is that before it used to be, we have AI or we have a solution that can do anything. Just tell us what you want to do and we can figure out how to do it. And I think what we're seeing now, to your point earlier, is I can come in and do X very well, and I can automate that process, or I can solve for this, or I can make sure that all of your data is valid here. And so the specialized solutions that maybe is get in the door, prove out the accuracy and the validity, and then build from there and continue the automation either on the claims or the underwriting side. So I think what we're seeing doing really well is the proven business outcome on something very specific that's solving a true pain point, and then expanding from there, as opposed to being, I have a technology solution that will solve all your problems. Just tell me what they are. That doesn't seem to resonate too much.
Yeah, I 100% agree with all of that. I say this a lot. I've never said it out loud on the podcast, and who knows how marketing will feel, but I don't think Indico actually has a tech advantage. And I think anyone in this space, in the language modeling, sort of the unstructured data space, that says we have a tech advantage, and they're not like OpenAI or, Microsoft or Google. They're probably selling snake oil. The thing that differentiates solutions to me nowadays is, have they actually solved the problem? Have they learned from solving the problem in the enterprise? And then has all of that learning gone back into the product? And so, Indico got to the language modeling space way before anyone else, and it was too early. But one of the advantages to that was we stepped on every landmine there is before anyone else did. And so the product is really built for the business user to be able to come in, essentially do their job, and have the machine learn from them doing their job. And then, the parts that work, it's very clear what the parts are that work, and the parts that don't, there are ways for those to, flow through the process, and get to the right people and the right subsequent downstream remediation efforts. So yeah, that's I don't think anyone has a tech differentiator, except in the sense of like user experience and understanding of what people are actually trying to do, and what's hard about it.
I think you just differentiated yourself, Chris, by being open and honest about that. Because I somewhat agree. I've tried to be kind about it by saying, like, there are only so many frameworks out there for this type of stuff, and from a tech perspective, everyone's pretty much doing the same thing. The implementation patterns, there's a few ways to do that, but everyone's pretty much doing the same thing. It's not what you have; it's how you use it that's making the difference now, right?
Yep, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Well, I'm gonna end on us complimenting Chris on that one. So, Stacey, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It was really insightful and enlightening. We appreciate you joining us. So, thank you, and for everyone else, this has been another episode of Unstructured Unlocked. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Michelle.